Well, what is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Hybrid Ministry Podcast, and now on YouTube. Excited to be with you all. We're going to test out a couple of video options here, see how these go. I know it'll go fine. Mostly I'm testing to see how much extra work it's going to be, but would love to have you join us over there if you want to check out the video stream as well. Something that is just another option. So we have audio, we have video, but everything, the home base for it is hybridministry.xyz. Of course, because hybridministry.com was taken. So I'm your host, Nick Clayson, excited to be with you. And in today's episode, what I actually wanted to discuss was this idea of why should churches even care about digital and hybrid ministry? Like, what is the purpose? We all saw the pitfalls, downfalls, and the reasons why digital ministry was not a good example. It was not a good thing during COVID. And so we are now past COVID. We're able to live in a more semi-normal world. Why in the world should churches even care about digital? So let's go ahead and let's get this episode underway. So let's talk about some assumptions, right? Like, I think that there are some general social media specific assumptions that say that social media is void of relationship, right? Like, the point of it is, I don't know, right? Like, the point of it is maybe to post some announcements, and try and drum up some marketing, so to speak, examples of people who might not go to our church and we want to get them connected to our church. But there's an assumption that, like, the main thing that's going to work is going to be relationships of people to people, inviting one another. Let me just say that I've been doing student ministry, social media now for 12 years, and never once has any one of the accounts that I've ever run really gone viral, so to speak. Like, we've never had more than like an inordinate amount of followers, never had more than like 1,000 followers. I have had a couple Instagram accounts with more than 1,000 followers, but honestly, like, that was not from anything that I or we were doing. That was more an inherited thing where the Instagram account already had a high level of followers, and we were just sort of like the beneficiaries of that account already having a lot of followers. So my point is, nothing we did really drummed up a lot of outside interest, okay? And so this assumption that social media is not relationship based, and, you know, the purpose of it is to, you know, get people from the outside looking in. I think that's a benefit. I think that, like we said in the last episode, the church is in a unique intersection where what you post can be both discovered by the people that go to your church, but also because of the new discovery algorithms, which this is probably why in my 12 years we haven't seen this, because these new algorithms that are being made famous by TikTok and then adopted by Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube on Reels and Shorts are new. Like, this is a new territory for churches, because previously your people followed your pages and your accounts, and if you wanted more people to follow it, you had to pay for it. And I have never done that, and so my accounts never really did that, where there were like a lot of people coming to discover our accounts. And so now we are in a unique intersection where people might actually discover your church. And what's more interesting is that all of these algorithms, there's a uniqueness where they start out geographically local. So first, the algorithm, from what we've learned, is they're pumped out to your followers, which are then pumped out to their followers, which are then pumped out to the like your geographical region, which is why a lot of times you can geotag your posts on Instagram, on TikTok, and so you can put your city, and so the people in your city might be exposed to your information first, and then beyond that, it'll, you know, go to the state and viral and whatever the case might be. But the reality is, the closer that you are, the more likely that the people around you are going to find it. And so therefore, if people in your geographical region are discovering your videos, there is an actual chance that they might hear the message of Jesus from you and then take a step to become a visitor or a first timer at your church. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be one of the goals that we're looking for here? And again, like I said, I haven't experienced that in a lot of cases, and I think that's because that really wasn't an option up here until very recently. However, there's still the argument that like no one's going to come to our church based off of that. And that might be true. And I think that it depends on your style of church. If you're a more of an outreach-centric church, that you want that. And so you're going to be more gung-ho about this idea. And if you're more of a discipleship-centric church, which tends to be a little more inward-facing, not because you believe that that's more valuable and more important, but that just tends to be the vibe that comes with it, then you are going to prioritize some of those relationships more over like cold leads or top of a funnel marketing type of terminology, to borrow from the secular world. So all that to be said, there's this assumption, there's this notion that social media and social ministry is void of real relationships. And I would debunk that and say that I think that that's not entirely true. I agree to a point that it can be done that way, and that this ministry, that this focus in your church needs some very particular and very deliberate attention. Like, it cannot just, in my personal opinion, it cannot be put on autopilot anymore. It cannot be put on the back burner. There needs to be a person more than a volunteer and more than someone's like section of their full-time hours devoted to social media. Like, you probably need a full-on person, not someone to do double duty. Like even right now, I am a youth pastor, but I'm like on a team of 3, and of the 3, I'm the one tasked with digital and video and social media, website, whatever, right? Like, that in and of itself is a full-time job. And sometimes my youth ministry duties have actually, like, this week I had to make calls to interview students about baptism, and we're onboarding a bunch of new students to volunteer. Like, sometimes those things feel like they're in the way of my digital stuff. And that's out of balance for me personally. But that's my point in saying that this digital stuff, it's all consuming. It just takes up such a gigantic portion, and it is vast and it is huge, and there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of potential. And so to just dump it on someone as like hey, 10 hours of your week, like, that is so hard. It's going to be very difficult for that person to be able to, to make that 10 hours work for them the way that you're probably hoping that it would work. So in COVID, right, we learned that we're not built to be completely isolated. And so just social, and that's the whole origin of this podcast. Is I felt like we were debating when I started this podcast in late 2022, I guess mid 2022, we were debating between in-person ministry and digital ministry, especially where I was. We were still working and operating out of a lot of the rules that we had built for COVID with the show that we had made for COVID. Like, we hadn't let that go. We were still producing it weekly. And we had found a way to pivot from strictly online to a more in-person model where groups watched it in host homes, and then they discussed the message afterwards. And I thought it was incredibly ingenious and innovative. But there were a lot of people in our church that didn't, and they were ready to just quote unquote go back. And, we had a marketing guy, and if you listen to some of our first, I think like 7 episodes, Matt was actually the co-host of this podcast. We both made cross-country moves, and I don't know what happened to him. I never got him back, really. I mean, we still talk, but he would keep saying like, yeah, I just got to get my computer set up. And eventually I was like, all right, Matt's not getting his computer set up. I got to produce weekly episodes, so I can't wait on him anymore, right? So here we are, and I'm just kind of doing this thing. Anyway, besides the point, Matt, marketing, honestly, genius guru, in my opinion, he said, the world we live in is now hybrid. In fact, Barna did a study. We did a couple episodes on it. I'll link to them in the show notes. Did a couple episodes on the findings that we found from Barna's study, and they titled it the state of hybrid church or something like that. And what it found was that especially the younger generations, the generations that are going to be filling our pews and churches here in the next couple years, Gen Z and millennials, said a hybrid version of church is going to suit them very well. What that often scares us with on two fronts is, number one, it feels like we're shifting away from in-person. And I think a lot of times in-person, and I've talked about this multiple times, I think a lot of times the in-person room or moment or feeling is for the vanity of the pastor. And not even in like a sinful or bad way, but just like, man, getting up in front of a room full of people feels really good. And you feel like you've done something and you've been somewhere. And there's a shot of like adrenaline into your like arm every time you get up there to preach. Even I find myself like finding more value from preaching to a live room of humans with interaction, like just, face-to-face interaction, than I do from a TikTok video that goes viral and we have over like 3,000 something views. Like it doesn't feel the same. And I get it. And you know what? I don't know that it is the same. I think you have a much more captive audience, even in a room of a few hundred, than you do with a short form under 60-second video that has over 1,000 something views, right? All that to be said, I'm not proposing that you throw one quote unquote baby out with the bathwater. We live in a hybrid world. All right. So I found this stat incredibly fascinating. 76% of Americans surveyed have a friend that they've met online only. They've never met in person, right? Now you might be thinking, how is that possible? Again, if you're older, think younger generations, gaming and chat rooms and whatever and whatnot. Like, of course, in the 90s, chat rooms was where pedophiles went to hang out. And they probably still do, right? But 76% of Americans have a friend in some way, shape, or form, gaming, social media, that they've never met in person. Like, I have an anecdotal, real example. I have a friend named Dan that for the first 3 to 6 months of our of our relationship life, it was strictly online. Many of you know I've told this story, but I started at my last church on day one of COVID and went immediately into lockdown. So the number of real live human beings at my church that I met was very, very small. The number of real live human beings that I met on Zoom after that was very, very large. And, I had met a decent number of the staff, at least from my interview or on my first day on the job. But then to meet other people, and Dan was just a regular church attender, volunteer, who led strictly online small group. I had a relationship with Dan, and he even said, he's like, you are like the poster child for me, or the poster example of what it looks like for somebody who says like you can't make friends with someone online. He's like, we totally made friends, with each other online. And so these are examples, both empirical data, 76% of Americans say they have a friend with someone who's completely online. And even in my own life, like I would say I had a real relationship with him. It would have been great to be sitting in the same living room or whatever. But at the same time, you know what? Every Tuesday night, I just got my laptop out in the comfort of my own home, brewed a cup of my own coffee that I personally enjoyed more than like a K-cup that someone was going to give me at their house. And we sat down for small group. And what was funny was like our church would do this thing where like you'd watch the live stream on YouTube. And this was the archetype for our student ministry. The group's team, of course, stole it. But we'd watch the video on YouTube, and then everyone would log in to their campus-specific Zooms via a link in the description. And then a moderator there would break everyone out into breakout rooms, so they would sort of have control over the entire call. And then they would give a warning after like an hour or so that all the groups would be closing down by the moderator, who's just literally sitting there out in the waiting room, just kind of waiting for people to be kicked out of their breakout rooms and reassign them or whatever. Super boring job. I've done it a million times, youth ministry. So a couple of times those ended, and our entire small group just jumped off and got into our very own room and had group until like 11 or 12. We weren't, at that point, we weren't talking about spiritual stuff. We were just joking around, goofing off, having fun, whatever, right? My point is relationships can exist in an online space. You just have to be deliberate. You just have to be intentional. And you have to be able and willing to massage those relationships. So let's talk about some hybrid ways that relationships can exist. So some of you might know this, but a couple weeks ago, my wife's mom, my mother-in-law, passed away from a 2+ year long battle with cancer. It was rough, man, like, not gonna lie. But the thing I want to kind of extract or highlight is the day that she passed away and that it became more public because of social media. Again, another example. My phone was flooded with text messages. My wife's phone was flooded like 3-fold, 10-fold with text messages. Every single one of those people were people that we had met in person at one moment in time or another, whether they be a family member, whether they be a friend, whether they be a former colleague or work associate from another job that we've been at. They'd all been people we'd met in real life person before. However, the relationship at that moment existed in a hybrid space. Very few people in that exact moment were with us. I mean, I had to drive from Texas all the way back to Ohio. So the only people with me were me and my 2 kids. And her, she was with her sister and with some family friends. And then everybody else reached out and provided love and care and support via text message. That is an example of a hybrid relationship. You know what I mean? And some people were people that I work with now at the church I'm at now. Other people were people I worked with in the past that reached out. Either way, right? Like, they're all people I knew, but they're all showing up for me in a hybrid way. So, I want to talk about a few examples of like other businesses that we might interact with in the world with hybrid sort of interactions. Let's dive in. Examples of real life hybrid interactions. My favorite of this is Home Depot, right? I interact with Home Depot at the store level. I drive up, I go into the store, I grab 98 cents of plumbing tape, right? That's an example of me interacting with Home Depot at a physical level, okay? All right, so another example, of course, is me interacting with Home Depot at an online level. I might go on the website and I might see how much of a certain item is in stock, but I'm not in the store. I'm completely in my house. I'm looking at all my computer on the app. But the app actually is my favorite feature. When I'm in the store, I almost never, like, if I walk around in the store for like more than 2 minutes and I can't figure out where an item might be, I immediately pull up the app, which often I've uninstalled from my phone. So I reinstall it. Then I like, almost the first thing I do when I walk into Home Depot is begin to reinstall the Home Depot app. Find my local Home Depot, the one I'm physically standing in. And then I look that item up, whatever it is, to try and find it. And then it'll tell me exactly where it is, what aisle, what bay, and how many more they have in stock. I love that feature. That's hybrid. I'm in person, I'm in the store, but I'm interacting with a digital piece of technology, for my relationship with Home Depot. Another example is a dentist office, right? You go to a physical visit. But I love when a service like this has a great website, especially for being able to book appointments or being able to reach out. This last week, I brought my car to an auto mechanic shop. I called them, called them, right? That's an example of me from my house calling them. That's old school technology. You get it, right? Then I show up, I'm in their office. But then when I was done, you know what they did? They sent me a text message to let me know that my car was ready. You see, all these things, and I think like in a lot of ways, like when we talk about digitization or hybridization of church and of ministry, we don't even know what that looks like. So right now, in a lot of ways, that's social media, that's video content. But the reality is, like, some of this is uncharted territory. So for 2023, for right now, for someone just starting out, what are some examples? What are some ways that your church can live and exist in hybrid ministry? All right, so like I said, I think a little bit of this is like pioneering, uncharted territory, Pilgrim's Progress. Like, we don't know some of these answers, but what are some examples of ways that your church can live and be hybrid? So the first one is probably the most obvious one and probably the easiest one, I would say, is your Sunday sermon, okay? So what are ways that your Sunday sermon can exist in a hybrid space? Well, first and foremost, right, you can, while someone is sitting in the auditorium, they can interact with and engage with your sermon notes, or they can interact and engage with some self-guided like outlines or ways for them to take notes. So like in my church, my pastor puts his notes on our church app. It's essentially probably the manuscript that he's up there preaching with as I've looked at it. Like, it's very thorough. And my guess is that that's a workload decision, right? Like, he already built this. So if he just if they or someone just copy and paste and put this into the app, that's not that much more work for him. My personal favorite example is the YouVersion events feature. So in everyone's YouVersion Bible app that most people have downloaded on their phones, if not, definitely recommend it, because again, it's another way to interact with people in a hybrid way. There's an events tab that you can create like a self-guided sort of outline, and then people can take and add notes to certain headers or certain Bible verses that are related to or interact with the passage. And then they can also link out to like videos or other like further discussions. One of the things I try to do is I try to challenge myself to add one option of a link out from a YouVersion event for deeper study or for more information or for a longer YouTube video that I didn't have time to show or didn't have time to like fully, unpack. I try to challenge myself to do that every week. Again, to just think hybrid, right? Brady Shearer has made this phrase famous, but the additional 167 hours of somebody's week. So then beyond that moment, beyond that Sunday service, you can, of course, rip out the audio. If you're already live streaming, you can have live stream. You can post those videos to YouTube. You can long form podcast content on a podcast feed. That's a way for it to be hybrid. And then finally, ways for that to live on and find its way into that intersection of your church people being reminded of the message and people from outside your church maybe discovering and stumbling upon your message are short form Instagram Reels, TikTok videos, YouTube Shorts. If you're already live streaming your content, you're sitting on a gold mine of social media content. You don't have to come up with as much social media content as you did in the past. You already have it. You have the long form video. Clip it up into minute segments. Find a good hook. Get a good editor. And hey, if you don't have a good editor but you're interested in it, reach out. I'm interested in starting something, kind of on the side for myself to be doing this and serving churches in that way. I don't exactly have a framework for that or what that looks like. Hit me up in DMs on TikTok or, reach out to me via YouTube. All those links in the show notes at hybridministry.xyz. What about groups? What about relationships? How do you hybridize relationships, right? Because that's sort of the basis for this whole thing, is that social isn't built on relationships. And I would agree with that in the nitty gritty. Like when my mother-in-law passes away, I want someone to really show up for me or really call me or really, text me. Not just, interact with them at a digital or social media type level, right? But for a lot of people, the discovering of groups or finding their place or finding their people, that's half of the battle. And so if your church does not have some sort of group finder, I would highly recommend doing that. If your church is about groups in some way, shape, or form that are open, that people opt themselves into, then get yourself a group finder, a catalog, if you will, of the options available at your church for people to find and discover real, authentic community. Because you and I know that community is really what changes things. It's what takes a church from their church to my church. So get on a group finder of some way, shape, or form. And then once you're in those groups, here are other ways that those groups exist and live in a hybrid sort of sense. You might use a infrastructure like Facebook group. You might use a GroupMe. You might use a group chat. Or you might use some other tool feature that someone's going to develop down the road. Maybe I'll do it and get rich. I don't know. But for the groups to have some sort of calendar of events, a place for them to have message boards with announcements, text messages to interact back and forth, prayer requests, all kinds of different stuff, but a place for the group to live beyond when the group meets, right? Again, the other 167 hours of that group's relationship. When is that? Where is that? When does that take place? The last area, so we talked about sermons, we talked about relationships, now let's talk about information. Church is more than just information. People are distilled down to more than just the information that they put into their brains, okay? But like another example of ways that things can exist in a hybrid sort of way is some classes. So you already have your Sunday morning service. You probably already have groups. People probably can't devote too many more hours to the church, but maybe they do want to grow. Maybe they want to grow in their knowledge of theology, or maybe they want to grow in a specific topic, dating, marriage, right? Whatever the case might be. Your church, with the 40 hours a week in your office, can film some content and put up a catalog or a library of courses, like on a website or on an app. 6-week course, 8-week course, something like that. So again, if someone's really committed, they may not have the time to drive back over to your church and sit through a class, find childcare, all the things. But once the kids go to bed, if they want to pull open their laptop and learn more, grow more in the area of theology, love, dating, marriage, spiritual gifts, right? Like you name it, you can offer a library of some of those content. I mean, products already sort of exist for that right now, for churches. Right now, media is an example of it. But again, I've found that to be more small groupy content. So you can create something. If there's a need, you can scratch that itch, a leadership type academy. And you might even have like a leadership academy for high level leaders in your organization, in your church, that come together every so often in person. But then after they come together, if the primary goal of it is information and knowledge, and information transfer, you can accomplish that for sure. You can accomplish that in a hybrid sort of way. More than just short form video sermon content, you can provide short form social media, TikTok, YouTube type content, like about any topic. Right now I'm doing like a little bit of a theology 101, like a deep dive into like certain areas and elements. And I'm posting on TikTok 2 times a week. It's a little mini series that people probably just like randomly scrolling through aren't going to notice that they're all like interwoven and connected together, but in my mind they are. And so anyone who sees it, they're going to learn something more about God or about Jesus or about creation or about salvation or about the Holy Spirit or whatever the case might be. Because I don't have time to always get into all that, right? Like whatever our series is, that's sort of driving and dictating what's being taught from the platform. But there are other necessary things that I think people, my students, need to know that I don't have time for, but this is a way that I can create time for it in the other hours of the week. There are also examples and ways to do long form, styles, not just short form. So audio podcasts are huge. A lot of adults, something like 80% of adults listen to 3 hours of podcasts a week. So I think Mariners, like Eric Geiger out of Mariners, is doing a phenomenal job. Because the thing I love about him is he's conservative theologically for sure. And so he's not just like out there trying to like get vanity metrics or whatever, right? But the thing he's doing is he's finding ways to use the technology to teach deeper, more robust, truths. And so he's doing a thing like a podcast called like the things that didn't make it into the sermon. Basically, if you're a pastor and you've done this before, you know that you prepare a load of content, but then you have to start cutting to get it down to a certain minute mark, right? So he's doing a podcast on all the things he had to cut from his sermon once a week to just dive deeper into more information. And I think that that's brilliant. I think that's a brilliant way to just add more value to the people in your church's, life. And if they're interested in it, that's great. A couple years ago, back when Facebook Live was a really big thing, me and another pastor on my staff, we sat down for a thing called Tuesdays at 2, and we just unpacked the sermon from sort of our eyes and our vantage point, and we would just have a conversation as sort of interview style. And I mean, he was a licensed biblical counselor, so he was just a wealth of knowledge. And so I almost operated more like as the host, and I would just toss him questions and let him sort of like unpack and untangle, take the theology or the preaching and bring it down to more of like a boots on the ground level. At least that was the goal. So all kinds of like ideas out there of ways that you can service and serve your congregation in a hybrid sort of way that is not void of relationship, that is meaningful, and that people in your church will take advantage of. You just have to think hybrid. So I'd encourage you, lean into it. Like I said, we're on a little bit the pioneering front, because we had solutions for digital pre-COVID. It was mostly live streaming your service. Then in COVID, we all went full bore into it, and it was uncomfortable and unfamiliar. And so once restrictions lifted, we went back to what was familiar. Many of us went back to what was familiar. And I'll just encourage you to not abandon some of those things, but listen for and look for ways that you can show up in the other hours of your church members' weeks. Those are going to be what's important and valuable to them. Well, hey everyone, if you found this podcast helpful, please share it with a friend. Help us get the word out. hybridministry.xyz. We provide complete, full show transcripts for every single episode that we've ever produced. Also, head to the blog section of that, and you can grab our free social media checklist, what to do every time you post to social media, and our free complete guide to posting a TikTok from scratch, from start to finish. That is on there. And again, we are on YouTube now, with this episode being the first one. Hey to everyone on YouTube, check that out if you will. Again, link for that is in the show notes. And until next time, talk to y'all later. Stay hybrid.